Anxiety is your body responding to the sight of death. Every single time you've ever felt anxiety in your life was an encounter with death. The amount of anxiety felt being in direct correlation to your body's perceived degree of separation from it. All anxiety is a regulatory mechanism to steer us away from death. Each mistake we make, each problem we create makes our death ever so slightly more likely for us. Having this in mind, how can we explain the fact that nearly all our anxiety is seemingly reaction or anticipation of things utterly unrelated to our physical safety? We worry about being judged, about failing, making mistakes while a bunch of people watch us, the fucking clothes we wear, the shape of our bodies. Our ability to be anxious about seemingly meaningless stuff is uncanny, despite the fact that any of those probably has some logical explanation as to how it slightly helps us avoid death. It still is a mystery as to how it translates in our body as an actual threat that we put real actual thought and effort into. So then, we might ask, what mechanism does our body use to get us to worry about such things? After all, we're self-aware creatures. How do we explain this neurochemical sourcing? And the answer is ego. Nearly all our anxieties are related to our identities. And in our mind, our identities are equally as important as our physical body. To the point where, if your identity was to be destroyed, it would be akin to your body dying. In some instances, we're even willing to let our body die to try and preserve part of our identity. Think of how many people died trying to defend a belief they heavily identified with.
I have a dream.
What were they really doing, if not giving up their physical body because they've decided their identity held more importance? They said, I'd rather this part of my identity lives on than my actual genetic soup. Which, to me, is an insane concept, and that is exactly how we react to outside emotional and mental attacks. Being stabbed by an emotional dagger can be far more painful and long-lasting than a physical one. The problem is, a lot of those perceived attacks are dumb and illegitimate, coupled with counterproductive worry that make us commit even more mistakes, make us less willing to carve our path in life, by preventing us from facing our fears and living our life to the fullest. The modern world's excessive removal of early outside stressors also contributed to making anxiety more prevalent in our adulthood. This isn't mere speculation. Studies have shown that a certain level of stress in early childhood is not just preferable, but necessary in terms of nurturing long-term happiness and mental health, which makes sense, since it makes us more fit to deal with the world. Both too much and too little stress have a near equivalent negative impact on our mental development. So then, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the anxiety? If you accepted it, truly accepted it, with not a fragment of doubt left in your entire body, then even if you knew you were gonna die, even if you knew your whole being would vanish into nothingness the next minute, you wouldn't budge a fucking inch in the face of the Reaper himself. Assuming that you agree with that statement, it proves that we in the end hold all the power. After all, any anxiety we possess is inconsequential in the face of ultimate death, which gives us a window through which we get to reclaim some control over ourselves. To build on that point further, let's say this: if you truly accepted all versions of yourself, all potential futures, all your memories, basically everything that ever happened, and every possible thing that can ever happen to you, then any shred of anxiety you possess would dissolve and you'd basically be floating 2 feet off the ground in an endless state of bliss. Obviously, that's bordering on the supernatural, since we're human and can't just be accepting of everything. Nevertheless, this gives us crucial insight into the power of acceptance in freeing us from anxiety, revealing subsequently a very pervasive theme regarding our anxieties, which is rejection. You feel anxious because you reject a possible future outcome. More importantly, you reject the version of yourself in that outcome. I'll give 2 situational examples so as you can get how this applies to real life. One person with a certain level of social anxiety has to attend a party that is packed with strangers. Knowing they cannot escape neither the party nor conversing with the people there, they would inevitably feel a high level of anxiety and worry, and would likely play all sorts of potential catastrophic conversations and situations in their mind beforehand. Another person with a certain level of judgment fear has a presentation to do in front of their colleagues at either work or uni the next morning. Knowing all eyes would be on them and their work for a good 2 hours, they would likely be in a heightened state of anxiety the night before as well, thinking about all the possible mistakes they could make, all the ways they'd embarrass themselves, how they'd make themselves the laughing stock among their peers, nearly all people would feel a certain amount of anxiety in anticipation of both situations. But at a certain level, for certain people, the anxiety becomes pathological, which I assume is a state we've all at some point been in and can all testify as to how unpleasant it actually is. Cherry on top is that it makes the situation actually worse. And the solution is for them both to imagine themselves doing the thing they are so afraid of doing, or the thing they are so afraid of happens, and accepting themselves and the situation still. The socially anxious person has to accept the version of themselves that says something weird or isn't that good at conversation. The person afraid of being judged has to accept the version of themselves that makes a mistake, that repeats themselves, or whose work slightly sucks. They both have to get to a point where they know that despite their fear coming true, and to go even further, despite any potential outcome, they still accept themselves, and they still accept the consequences of what they do, of what happens. No version of ourselves is ever unacceptable. No part of us is ever undeserving of existing. If you got yourself to truly embody this, then you'd be free of worry. It is the feeling of whatever happens, I'll be fine. But instead, what we do is we only accept the version of ourselves that doesn't fail, that is likable, that is free of flaws, of mistakes. And so, when we see the potential of those things not coming true in our future, or even the memories of them having not come true in our past, we abandon ourselves. And so, we suffer. We threaten ourselves. And so, we feel anxious. In a way, what I'm describing is self-love, which I know sounds cheesy and cringe when we hear it talked about. But don't get too cringe when you get to understand that the norm with which we all unknowingly operate with is conditional self-acceptance, or even conditional non-self-hate. We, on the daily, say to ourselves, who I am is only acceptable if I do this thing, if I do this thing right, if this thing happens, if this thing doesn't happen, if I am able, if I am better. And when we fail, we do a small act of self-rejection. We threaten to reject ourselves if our conditions about how we should be, how the world should be to us, aren't met. And through that threat, our body gives us the feeling we call anxiety. Now, I'm aware that in our current world, one of the leading thoughts in self-growth, ambition, and the pursuit of success is to tell yourself who you are as of now is insufficient in order to get yourself moving forward and to achieve a higher, better version of yourself. And I'll admit, feelings of insufficiency can get you a long way, but you don't truly need that to become a better version of yourself, because the act of unconditional self-acceptance would relieve so much mental and physical energy, would erase so much fear that the barrier for action gets far lower. And weirdly enough, believe it or not, actually loving yourself for who you are makes you want to do better for your own sake. You get to act from a state of abundance, excitement, and drive, play. We fear resignation and complacency being the consequence of self-acceptance, but both those are only but coping mechanisms for our fears. A true act of self-acceptance removes all friction and propels us forward. Even if you're not yet good enough to deal with a certain situation, you can still accept yourself while also admitting your own current insufficiency. So you can take the necessary actions to get better without beating yourself with a fucking stick at the same time while trying to do so. Having bombarded you with all this information, I don't really want this to end up just like something you kind of thought as somewhat inspiring and forgot about 10 minutes later. Because I know how valuable this has been to me, and can potentially be to you. I'm gonna tell you how to implement all this in your daily life. And don't worry, not gonna ask you to meditate or download the app or some shit. Just throughout the day, when you either are in a state of anxiety or something triggers the anxiety, actively notice it, bring attention to it, and then find a way to accept yourself in spite of going through the situation that gives you anxiety. Or accept the situation itself, no matter the outcome. You're gonna be bad at it at first, most likely, but as all things, if you keep practicing, eventually you'll start noticing and recognizing your anxieties far easier and faster, and deal with them much better. Of course, you can't solve every possible anxiety you have using this, but you wouldn't believe how life-changing this could be if you truly learn to implement this. You have to prove to yourself that you will never abandon yourself. No matter what everyone thinks, no matter what the entire world thinks, you'll always have your back. If you got your body to understand this, you will be liberated. You're trying to build a pathway in your mind towards this state of acceptance, meaning that at first it will be somewhat hard or a bit effortful to achieve. But the more you do it, the more the pathway shortens, quickens, strengthens, until you reach a point of near instant access. Another point is, We sometimes are in a state of worry, of unease, for no particular reason. If you truly try to notice and give attention to your consistent baseless anxiety, it will most likely come with a particular brand of belief, which is that you think you deserve to feel anxious, that you are not just allowed to exist without worry, are not allowed to enjoy yourself without feeling uneasy, you're not allowed to just be and relax. To put it simply, you feel anxious because you allow it. It is all coming from you, despite how clueless you might be about it all. You are in control. Truly. I'm not saying some airy-fairy shit to try make you feel better. I mean this in a very real sense. You have control, and this all comes down to one single sentence that I've had to hammer into my thick skull over and over, which is, you don't need to do anything to have the right to be. You can choose to be in a state of guilt-free bliss. If you choose, that is what you deserve every time you notice yourself being anxious for no reason. I know I just dumped a lot of information on you, and it's kind of a lot to take all in at once, but hopefully you find this helpful. I made this in a way that if my younger self found it, it would have saved him a lot of unnecessary suffering and time unwisely spent. This could be a series if people wanted to. I've had to cut it short because it would have taken far too much time to make all at once, and you would have ended up with an hour-long video. Yeah, dump a like if you want another part of this. See ya.